So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this, which is our third Women's Budget Group Early Career Network Conference. My name's Mary-Ann Stevenson, and I'm the director of the Women's Budget Group. For those of you who don't know, the Women's Budget Group is a network of feminist academics, activists, people from civil society organisations, trade unionists and others. What we do is we analyse the impact of economic policy on women and men and on different groups of women and men. And we work to promote policies for a gender equal future. If you're not already a member of the Women's Budget Group, we're free to join, and you can sign up on our website, which is wbg.org.uk. So this is a conference organised by and for the Early Career Network. Our goal with the Early Career Network is to connect feminist researchers in the early stages of their careers who are working on economics, political science, and other areas of public policy through a gendered lens. And these conferences are an opportunity for members to come together, to network, to meet with established academics, albeit virtually, and to create a dedicated space for early career researchers to present their research alongside more established researchers. We're using a conferencing software called Remo, and you'll find out more about that as the conference goes on. But what that does is it allows both a presentation mode, which is what we're in at the moment, and a networking mode where you're actually on tables and you can move around and talk to different people. And it's the closest we can come to trying to replicate the actual conference experience. So the conference this year aims to apply a feminist approach to the climate debate and really shed light on the key links between gender and climate change. What we want to do is to challenge existing policy frameworks on climate change while creating a space to strengthen feminist thinking and solutions. As the world now moves forward from a global pandemic, which shone a light on the foundational nature of care work, it's time to envisage a future where feminized labour like child rearing and adult social care are properly valued, financially rewarded, and a central part of our economy. And as climate change intensifies, women continue to face higher rates of violence, displacement, poverty, and unpaid labour. Yet their voices and perspectives are often left out of the decision-making processes on climate solutions. And climate justice means not just addressing the climate change simply as an environmental problem, but also as a social justice problem. And our solutions must be not just environmental solutions, but opportunities to achieve social justice, placing at the centre the voices of those who will experience the most acute effects of climate change. Coronavirus has exposed entrenched inequalities and stark disparities of power, showing clearly how a global crisis like this impacts differently depending on their socioeconomic status, gender, race, age, where they live, among many other things. And the same is true on climate change. And the negative consequences of this crisis for gender equality are considerable. Recovery plans must address the uneven economic impact of the pandemic and address the climate crisis too. And that's something that we've done at the Women's Budget Group with our proposals for a care-led recovery. Feminists have continued to highlight the lack of intersectional gender analysis in the environmental sphere, where solutions rooted in orthodox economic thinking are too often the norm. So what we've planned today is a host of sessions and networking opportunities that will allow us to explore these ideas. First of all, as soon as I've finished, we'll have two panel discussions. The first looking at feminist visions for the future of working, where we'll have 4 presentations, 2 from Early Career Network members, exploring the current economic order and calling for rethinks of the capitalist development model. The second panel, Towards a Just and Sustainable Feminist Future, will have 5 presentations, again 2 from Early Career Network members and 1 from Kezia, who's been doing a paid internship at the Women's Budget Group, setting out a feminist plan for a more equal and sustainable future. We'll then move to the afternoon session, where there'll be a new Remo link, which we'll share with you all beforehand. We're going to break for lunch from 12:45 to 2, But for the last 30 minutes of the lunch break, so from 1:30 to 2, we're creating a space for people at the conference to network and meet others. So the ECN panelists plus Women's Budget Group staff will be on different tables where you can join us for a chat about the presentations from today, find out more about the work of the Women's Budget Group, have general discussions about climate justice. There'll also be an open space where you can facilitate the networking yourselves. Just join a table, bring your lunch, and take part in friendly micro introductions. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that works later on today. At 2 o'clock, we have a skills workshop led by Emily Bell, who's our training officer for the local data project. In this workshop, we're going to reflect on how to advocate for climate justice in local areas of the UK. So the session is designed to introduce you to some data on your local economic profile, and we'll use this information to reflect on your local authorities' plans to combat the climate crisis. It's an interactive workshop, so please come ready to have your cameras and mics on. The final session will start at 3:30 and will be a round table with a group of feminist climate activists who are leading the movement on climate justice for all. And we have speakers from Kenya, from Nigeria, from Bangladesh and the UK. It's going to be a really fantastic event. And before I hand over to our first panel, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Ebian, who coordinates our Early Career Network and has done such a fabulous job in organising this conference, as I'm sure you'll agree as the day goes on. So thank you all very much for being here. It's great to see so many people here. I'm now going to hand over to Sarah Rees, who is our Deputy Director and Head of Research and Policy, who's going to chair the first panel. Sarah, do you want to come and join us up on the screen?
Hi, Marianne. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will now leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So this is our first panel of our 2021 Early Career Network Conference. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus this first session on feminist visions for the future of work. So there has been a lot of talk about how a transition to a net zero economy will mean a radically changed labor market, with job losses, particularly in high carbon and high polluting industries, and creation of jobs in areas that will anchor that green transition. But it's also equally important to focus on the kinds of jobs that we'd like to see and that we will need. And, you know, in terms of the quality of those jobs, when it comes to career progression, working conditions, good pay. And there are also jobs in sectors like the care economy that are just as important as the traditionally green jobs, to ensure that the new economy is also a caring one for people and planet. So we have 4 really interesting papers on this topic. So I'm going to invite Alexandra, Ugne, Özlem, and Marilyn onto the stage. So, brilliant.
Oh, perfect.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. All good. Okay, so we're waiting for one of the panelists to join us. We're a couple of minutes early, I guess, panel, because the panel is scheduled to start at 10:15. So we'll give 1 more minute or so to wait for Ugne to join us. But in the meantime, I would like to mention our Feminist Green New Deal project, which is a project that the Women's Budget Group is doing in collaboration with the Women's Environmental Network. So we've started earlier this year. And what we're trying to do is to bring a gender lens into the green transition debates that are being held.
Yes, your speaker is well connected. Yes. Welcome to Rema.
Okay, that's a good reminder. If people could put themselves on mute when they're not speaking, to avoid echo. Yes, so the Feminist Green New Deal is a project that WBG has with the Women's Environmental Network, and we're trying to bring a gender lens into the discussions that are being held at different quarters when it comes to a green transition, to make sure that a green transition will not just be one that will address the issue of climate change, but also that it's one that will address the issue of social justice, particularly when it comes to gender equality. So today in this panel, we have two presentations that are actually papers that are part of those discussions that we are encouraging in the context of the Feminist Green New Deal. So I'm very excited to have them on the panel, and to hear as well from two ECN members, Alexandra and Ugne, about their research on this topic as well. So I think we are going to start. So we are going to start with Özlem Onaran. So she is presenting a paper which is part of the Feminist Green New Deal project, and it's entitled "A Shorter Working Week for a Gender Equal Green Transition." So because Özlem will have to leave us earlier, because she has teaching commitments today, what we're going to do is Özlem is going to present her paper, and then we are going to ask questions from the audience.
Sorry, Sarah, can you take the second speaker? I wrote in the chat, I have connection issues.
Okay.
I'll sort them out.
Okay. So we'll go into the next speaker, no problem. So Alexandra, do you want to go first? So Alexandra is a senior lecturer in economics at the Nottingham Business School, and she's going to present a paper entitled "Does Thinking Green Mean Working Less?" So Alexandra.
Right. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be speaking here today. It's also a little bit overwhelming to present it with in the same session as Özlem, as I've been citing her during my PhD. But it's gonna be. I'm gonna be sharing my screen. Let's see. Right. So can someone confirm if they can see my screen? Perfect. So I'm going to be speaking quite briefly about a paper today, which I call "Does Thinking Green Mean Working Less?" And it's really looking at motivations for work time and how the preferences around there. The majority of my work, so I have a lot of different projects. They are all focusing about work time reduction. I'm also part of the European Network for Work Time Reduction, which is sort of looking at best practice around work time reduction, but less from an academic point of view and more from a sort of a union or activism, NGO aspect. So I really appreciate today's format of this conference, that is not just academics in our own bubble, but using a sort of broader format. So work time reduction, or the work time debate, is no longer just something that is within academics, but it has sort of resurrected recently in public, in media. Traditionally, the work time reduction has been driven by unions, and we've been talking about this sort of traditional benefits. It's fallen within health and well-being. We talk about productivity of workers, but also well-being. As was mentioned in the sort of warm-up of this conference, or is that there's new interest in the idea around social justice, and this also falls within the concept of working time. We've seen that we have many cases of increases in illness associated with work time related stress. It's driving numbers up of anxiety and depression. We also know that sort of the development of leisure time has stalled since the 80s. In many cases, we're seeing that working time is actually increasing in certain countries, and especially when we're taking into account the sort of change from the traditional breadwinner model to a adult working model, which means that in one household now we have 2 people working full time. So the overall contribution to the labor market is increasing. Something that is also starting up quite recently, maybe more in the sort of academic discussion, is that there's environmental benefits to shorter working time. And that's sort of where my research comes in to this debate. How does that work? Well, work time reduction and the environment are quite closely linked. There's so much in how we are behaving as a society that is relating to working time. But when we're thinking about sustainability, it's mainly within 2 sort of main effects that we tend to look at it, which is the scale effect and the composition effect. So if we are introducing work time reduction, we are expecting to see changes in our scale effect, which means that whether we are looking at a work time reduction with a loss of income, we're going to see quite immediate loss, because with lower income, we have lower consumption, and lower consumption means lower environmental impact. Even if we are doing a work time reduction with kept income levels, we would assume that over time we are taking this efficiency gains and move them towards leisure gains rather than income gains. A lot of the times when I'm talking about this, I meet people who say that we can't focus on income loss in a society where people are struggling to survive. And I do just want to say that the first aim with sort of work time reduction needs to be a redistribution. So at the moment, we have people who are sort of more time rich but money poor, and people who are time poor but more money rich. And there is supporting policies in work time reduction suggestions that would take away this sort of negative effect, especially for low income households. Something I'm looking a lot at is the composition effect. So we're basically suggesting that with work time reduction, we would also have change in behaviors, which would be positive for the environment. So we tend to see that people are both, well, I'm going to come back to that, so I'll stop myself there. A positive part from a sort of more feminist perspective is that work time reduction, it's highly suggesting that work time reduction would disestablish some of the penalties that we currently see from working part-time. And we know that this is a disadvantage that is mostly carried by women today. So I do have a microeconomic focus in my research, and there's a lot of focus today on why are we not behaving more sustainable. And a normal explanation for this is there's not enough knowledge out there and there's no willingness. But a lot of the data on UK households show that we possess both willingness and awareness to start acting on climate change, but there seems to be a value action gap. And research has shown that a lack of actually leisure time or time to reflect and think and change our behaviors is likely to be a major reason for this value action gap. So this comes back then to the sort of composition effect of work time reduction, improving sustainability. A lot of the sustainable behaviors that we're seeing take a little bit time, especially when it comes to changing our behaviors. But also, we are stressed, we take to be locked into certain consumption patterns. We do what we've always done. So because I'm a little bit short of time, I'm going to move on. What I've done in this paper is, it's an empirical analysis. I'm looking at the relationship between pro-environmental behavior and working hours. Previous studies have shown that actually people who state that they care about the environment tend to work longer hours. So that goes against the hypothesis that there is a positive relationship there. We've also seen that when work time reduction is introduced, it tends to have a high uptake by young women who do work time reductions to stay home with their kids. So we see that work time reduction policies risk sort of reinforcing gender roles and increasing the current social inequalities that we're experiencing. I've used econometric regressions, simple OLS regression using Understanding Society for this paper. And I'm looking at paid working time, I need to state. Next step of my research is to include unpaid work into this research. But currently I've started from the sort of very basis and looked at paid working time. So how many hours does someone work per week? And then including both paid and unpaid overtime, but still the very sort of formal definition of work. I'm then including my variable of interest, which is my environmental behavior, and then a range of control variables that the literature is showing has high impact on our working time. So always trying to show econometric results is quite confusing. So what I've chose to do rather than focusing on this screen is I zoomed in on some variables that I think might be of more interest for this presentation. So I know I'm running out of time. Just quickly gonna say that generally we've seen that when we look at the very general public and sort of preferences on working time, we know that the life cycle theory holds. People tend to work longer hours with age. When we get more economic demands on us, we want to buy a house, we might get the family, etc., until a certain point where we are sort of preparing for retirement. We see that women work shorter hours than men. This is interesting because in my analysis here, I'm including things like household work, responsibility for children. So we're seeing that despite accounting for these type of activities, there still seems to be a sort of gendered, almost cultural effect towards working hours. Health was insignificant in my analysis, but that I think is due to the data. Almost we had people almost just stating, yeah, I'm feeling okay, rather than any sort of breadth of data. Education, I have done reverse coding here, so it looks a bit strange, but with higher education, people tend to work for a longer time. There is plenty of explanation for that in the literature, saying that we both have the sort of managerial positions that tends to work very long, but we also have the sort of that you can work longer when you're higher education because it's not as physically demanding. We see that living with people who live alone tend to work longer hours than when you live with someone, and this is a much larger effect if we include responsibility for children. My variable of interest, we see that actually, and this is very interesting, people with high pro-environmental behaviors tend to work shorter hours than people with less environmental behaviors. there's a causality question here, so I'm not going to say there's a straight correlation between pro-environmental behavior and working time, but this is something to look at further. My concluding slide basically says that previous research has suggested there is a value action gap between environmental attitudes and working hours, but my preliminary results suggest that actual behaviors around pro-environmental behavior and working time has a positive relationship. And we know that barriers towards a more equalized working time is, as expected, responsibility for children, hours spent on housework. And going forward, I'm going to do a more intersectional analysis in the way that it's allowed from the data.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. That was a really interesting presentation to kick us off on the issues of shorter working weeks and the potential of that to achieve both a greener economy and gender equality as well. So what I'm going to do now is try to check in with Özlem and see if she has been able to sort the issues with her connection that she was having. So I don't know, Özlem, if you are there, or if you are still trying to sort. It seems that she might still be facing some issues with her connection. So what we're going to do is we're going to go straight into the next presentation. And that is going to be Ugne Litvinaite. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Pretty okay.
So Ugne is a student at the London School of Economics and a researcher at the Diversity Development Group, which is an NGO. And she's going to present her paper on a green and care economy visions, the Wollstonecraft's dilemma. So Ugne, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Just allow me a couple of minutes to make sure that I can share the right screen with you. Okay. Okay, you are seeing this now. I'll do Can I ask you what you see when I put a presenter view?
If you click on play from start, maybe that will take us to the slideshow.
Sorry if I'm jumping in. When you go to share, you can choose to share just a specific window. So you can choose present the view, and that's what we are going to see, and then you can see your own slides.
I think I'm doing that, but so now you don't see the slide.
No, you have to stop. You have to stop sharing and then reshare again.
Oh, okay. What do you see?
Now we see your notes, so we are not seeing the.
Well, okay, so I'll do. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. That's always the issue with using new conference softwares.
Okay.
The easiest way to do is to.
Yeah, I think I'll do this.
Okay, we can
this is almost okay.
Yes.
This is gonna be like that. I'm sorry for the part in yeah, above. Sorry, you'll see that. Okay, so I can start, I guess. So thank you, Sarah, for the presentation. Thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be here. Today, I am presenting my analysis of green economy visions through the lenses of Wollstonecraft's dilemma, as you can see. It is my voluntary research project, so it obviously had its limits in terms of time and other constraints, but hopefully it will make a meaningful contribution to the discussions that we as feminists are and should be having. And the question that I'm answering through my analysis is, could the green visions proposed in the US and the EU lead to full and equal inclusion of women in societal and economic life? So if we understand economy as embedded in society, envisioning new post-industrial, post-carbon economy entails necessarily envisioning new social and work arrangements. And in doing that, those visions implicitly define who is included in and excluded from the institutions created through the transition. So I scrutinize what are the pathways for inclusion. And coming from a feminist standpoint, my primary concern is whether women can access those pathways, and in what ways, and what gender order does that imply. In the end, I'll come to the question, how can they be adjusted? Okay, so thinking about inclusion, I draw on the concept of citizenship, which has been theorized as a status or social membership in a community where citizens are given certain rights, civil, political, and social. The latter I center in my analysis. It's also been seen as a practice where emphasis is rather on obligations, orthodoxically in the public sphere. From the 20th century onwards, we really speak about work as an obligation of a citizen. As Lister notes, those are like two dimensions of citizenship which are mutually supportive. So we can think of rights as enabling citizens to participate, and we can see certain obligations as giving access to certain rights. And we can think of what Pateman calls employment societies, societies where social and economic security is tied to employment. In ways that citizenship rights are conditioned on performance of obligations in the public sphere, citizenship has not been fully accessible to everyone. And to me, here it matters how citizenship is gendered. So here the public-private divide is really key to understanding, as Lister puts it, ways in which the gender division of labor in the private sphere shapes the access of both women and men to the public sphere and to the rights of citizenship which derive from such access. So my feminist effort private sphere in relation to the market and in the visions that I analyze, and to see how they interact in enabling or preventing citizens from gaining certain citizenship rights. Key concept in analyzing how that dynamic plays out is Wollstonecraft's dilemma as described by Pateman. She writes about two ways of including women in citizenship. Neither of those, according to her, deliver on that goal. So the first one is the liberal pathway, as she talks about employment societies where social protection and recognition of its deservedness depend on work, on employment. Women have to work. In order to enable this, gender-neutral world has to be created through anti-discrimination policies and more recently outsourcing of care out of the family. But even after entering the labor market on formally equal terms, women are still found in more precarious employment positions. And so their citizenship is precarious as well. So Pateman contends that this pathway condemns women to becoming less than men. An alternative is establishing a differentiated expression of citizenship, specifically for women as carers, in recognition of their specific capacities. In this way, however, we can loosely say that women are entitled to second-class citizenship, which is still not seen as that ideal of male worker. and does not receive the same status and protection. So is there any way out of Wollstonecraft's dilemma? Well, it's been recognized as unresolvable by many feminist theorists. I rely on two directions to resolve it. So Fraser argues more like quite.
I think your voice is breaking up, Ugne.
I'm sorry for the internet trouble.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, and so I guess you were lost in yeah. So I was describing Fraser, and Lister then calls for reconceptualized citizenship in a way that disrupts the public-private divide in that concept. So employed with those theories, I analyze conceptual frameworks of citizenship as a mechanism of inclusion or exclusion implicit in the Green New Deal resolution proposed by Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez in the US, the European Green Deal communication and related EU-led initiatives, and the Green New Deal for Europe by DiEM25, which was pushed as an alternative for the official European Green Deal. This is, of course, very global North-centered, but having in mind how widely those are discussed and celebrated, I felt like it's important to scrutinize them. And also, political scientists will probably note that this is a bit like comparison of apples and oranges, but I would like to highlight that I'm analyzing those documents as visions of imaginary worlds. So to test, in a way, what is possible to think of for those spearheading greening agendas in the global north. So let's go to the analysis quickly. The Green New Deal proposed in the West recognizes women as frontline and vulnerable community, subject to systemic injustices that are to be redressed by the Green New Deal. And throughout the document, really you can see those communities, including women, being prioritized in the text as receivers of benefits resulting from the deal. Citizenship is conceptualized as a status, wide variety of rights coming with it, including economic security. But in analyzing how this is to be achieved, it becomes clear that economic security comes with a worker status. So the deal calls for guaranteeing a job with a family-sustaining wage and social protection. And then there are many rights and protections that come with a worker status. But if we remember Wollstonecraft's dilemma, we can see that there's no access to the pathway of citizenship for those with caring responsibilities, since care services are not even mentioned. And while there is considerable attention to social investment as the right of the people of the US, there is no recognition of social reproductive work, including unpaid, but has to be channeled in creating goods like healthcare and healthy food, for example. So to conclude, the deal rests on androcentric conceptualization of citizenship based on full employment, but there is no consideration of services necessary for women to attain this, or recognition of their social reproductive work needed for the implementation of the deal. And in some, the concept of citizenship reminds of industrial family wage model with some social reproductive work sharing because of family leave for workers. Next, the European Green Deal, which promises to leave no one behind. This is a very technical project for many reasons, of course, and the social dimension is touched upon only in terms of creation of green jobs and requalification into those jobs, prioritizing sectors and regions most affected by the transition. There is no mention of social security in those jobs, also beyond support for several very technical greening related goods. There is no attention to social investment. So in conclusion, largely, this is a vision of economy disembedded from society, of limited inclusion. The pathway for women to be included is unclear if there is any. However, European Pillar of Social Rights is mentioned as a guide to fulfill that promise of no one left behind. So if we look at the citizenship framework there, it is very rigidly tied to employment, but workers here, unlike in the US Green Deal case, have a comprehensive set of rights under work-life balance. So there's the right to care services, to family leave, and also special measures to ensure like sharing of those caring responsibilities between women and men. Finally, the Green New Deal for Europe. I'm sorry, I'm over time, but we had technical issues, so I'll just quickly try to wrap up. So the Green New Deal for Europe, again, promises fair economy. It is interesting because it's the only one that commits to shifting from production to environmental and social reproduction. And in saying that, it spells out determination to reconceptualize public-private divide, which is very of my concern. And it is indeed what happens. The deal proposes guaranteeing jobs with lower working hours. At the same time, commits to significant investment in a variety of shared public services. And then it tries to put carers in private sphere or informal economy, such as in parity with workers in formal economy by proposing care income. However, the deal does not set out social protection measures for carers nor workers, and is absolutely ignorant of the gender division of labor. In a way, it describes mothers in the rationale for care income. It's even encouraging of it, I'd say. And so there's a risk built in this design that women will continue assuming carers' role, both as their main work and as a double shift. But care income will be available only for those not in formal employment and, unclear social security. So I would say that the disruption of public-private divide is attempted, but really stopped short by silences and cultural challenge to gender division of labor. In conclusion, this analysis shows that ideals that implicitly follow liberal pathways for women's inclusion would only be promisable if care services were guaranteed and care responsibilities were distributed between or across, let's say, genders. Deal that reinvents citizenship, so the last one, and contain elements of differentiation is very promising because it disrupts public-private divide and formal-informal economy connotations, but it should entail measures redistributing not only resources to care, but also responsibilities for care, and be particularly mindful of cultural elements. So really, for full and equal participation of women in both public and private life, I'd say in addition to disruption of public-private divide through economic and social organization around care, there has to be a disruption or deconstruction, in the words of Fraser, of gender. Yeah, this is my references. Thank you very much. I'll be very happy to receive any comments or critiques or anything via mail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ugne, for that overview of the different Green New Deals that have been proposed recently. So before we move on to the questions from the audience, I'm going to briefly invite Özlem to say some words about her paper.
Sorry, hopefully this is working now. Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Wonderful. This is my fourth computer. I'm now in my classroom. So I want to share the screen. Is it sharing? Can you see my screen?
No.
Okay.
So there's a button.
Özlem Onaran's screen. There is something working here very slowly. But it's, oh my God. Is it now working?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm now in my classroom, so we can go until 11, but students will start walking in shortly, so don't worry about that. Thanks for having me. I was able to hear you, but I couldn't get my camera, the mic and my mic on the same computer at the same time. So this is the fourth time and it's working now. Thanks to Sarah for the introductions, and thanks to Women's Budget Group for initiating the Feminist Green New Deal project. And this paper, as Sarah mentioned before, is part of the project. This is the first time we are presenting our results, so really very excited about that. It's co-authored work with my colleague Rob Calvert-Jump at Greenwich, who is on paternity leave now, so I'll be presenting alone. The project is about the shorter working week and how that is associated with both gender equality and a greener economy, so green and gender equal transition. And the aim behind the project is to address the intersecting crises, that is inequalities in multiple dimensions, and the environmental breakdown at the core of those crises. And one thing that is, of course, important to highlight, women to date in the UK and most developed economies, as well as developing economies, continue to work longer hours than men, if you add the total of paid and unpaid work, but men are paid for more of their work, and also men are paid more for their work. So what we analyze here is the association between shorter working week and a gender equal distribution in both paid work and unpaid work and income, while facilitating a green transition. So what would be the conditions in terms of economic policy to promote this association between shorter working week and gender equal green transition? We looked at 3 case studies, France, Portugal, South Korea, who have implemented countrywide legislation for a shorter working week. And we derived the lessons from both the positive and negative experiences of these 3 countries in coming up with our policy proposals. Now, a shorter working week is not unrealistic. Compared to the 19th century, we are all working part-time today. In this graph, we see the average annual hours actually worked per worker in selected OECD countries. You can see the secular continual decline from 50s onwards. If you go back to 19th century, the trend is even more dramatic. Now, at the same time, shorter hours of work are associated with lower gender gaps in paid work. In this graph, we are looking at the data from Britain for men and women both working full-time or part-time. That detail is available only from 1992 onwards. What you see here is clearly in the top line, the green line, main full-time and main job, shows us this downward trend in paid hours of work, in this case since 1992. This includes both the pandemic and its aftermath as well. But this downward trend in hours worked is really shaped by full-time men's experience. In the meantime, paid hours of women increased slightly. The orange line is the full-time women. And of course, we see the part-time women and men as well. So there is a convergence between the hours of work of full-time men versus part-time and full-time women as we shorten the work week. Shorter hours are also associated with lower gender pay gap. In the scatter plot, you see the hours of work actually worked for different countries. That's a snapshot from 2019, before the pandemic. And on the vertical axis, we have the gender wage gap in terms of the median wage. And this is just an association, of course, without implying any causality. It's clear that shorter hours of work are associated with lower gender wage gaps. This is, of course, related to the convergence in paid hours of work. And here is a more interesting thing. There is also a convergence in unpaid care work when hours of paid work is shorter in a country. In these 2 scatter plots, on the left panel, we have men's unpaid care work. Again, a snapshot from 2019 for OECD economies. So vertical axis is men's unpaid care work. Horizontal axis is, again, actual hours worked per worker per year. And you can see that the shorter the hours of paid work is, the longer is men's unpaid care work. An opposite association in the second panel exists for women. The shorter the paid working week is, the fewer hours of unpaid work women do. So in a way, shorter paid hours of work leads to more unpaid care work done by men. That is associated with also less unpaid care work done by women. And hence women have also more space to participate in the paid labor market. Hence, with that comes a range of mechanisms that may lead to also more gender equality in terms of paid work. Shorter hours of work are also associated with lower greenhouse gas emissions. Again, in the scatter plot for the OECD countries from 2019, on the vertical axis, we have greenhouse gas emissions per capita. On the horizontal axis, we have average annual hours actually worked. So you can say that shorter hours of work lead to lower levels of GDP at a given amount of employment, and by definition, lower greenhouse gas emissions. Also, it is associated with less carbon-intensive household work, leisure, or commute to work, because people opt for more time-intensive leisure or household work. Finally, shorter hours of work are also associated with higher productivity. Of course, this may differ across sectors. This is something that works better for manufacturing, and there may be different associations in the services sector, particularly in health and social care, where women constitute the majority of the workforce. Nevertheless, it's important to understand that a rise in productivity in the rest of the economy, outside the care economy, creates space for further reductions in working hours with no loss of pay and more public spending and higher wages in the care economy. We had an analysis of the time use data from the pandemic and its aftermath. We don't have much time to talk about that now, but the punchline here is men increased their unpaid care time during the first phase of the pandemic, when they faced a decline in both paid work and an increase in care needs in the household. Of course, women still perform the majority of the unpaid care work, given the patriarchal division of labor and social norms. And worse, this trend of the increase in men's unpaid care time during the pandemic was reversed in the second phase of the pandemic. But it still gives us a natural experiment to see what we can achieve if we have a managed decrease in paid working time during a week as an outcome of public policy and legislation, as opposed to the crisis shock like the pandemic. So our policy conclusions, combining also the case studies from the countries, is that to ensure that a green transition and shorter working week are equitable, they must be part of a comprehensive policy package. This policy package in particular should include strong pro-labor institutions, in particular strong and well-coordinated trade unions, equal pay legislation, increased job security, permanent contracts, and higher minimum wages, as well as a well-designed public investment program in social infrastructure to provide universal basic services, as well as a well-designed plan to address any skill and labor shortages in certain types of sectors, particularly in the care economy. And one of the lessons of the cases we look at is that a shorter working week with no loss of pay, particularly for the below median earning people, where we find a lot of women, is most likely to be introduced by the public sector, which can then pave the way for better practice in the private sector as well. So to conclude, a shorter working week and expansion in public social infrastructure and universal basic services is really the dramatic pivot needed to address social and political consequences of a dysfunctional health and social care system, extreme inequalities, and environmental breakdown. I'm happy to say that there are experiments happening in Spain currently, and Scotland is going forward with a 4-day work week plan. So this is now the reality. There were more things I wanted to say, but I think I will leave them to a second discussion. I'll stop sharing. I'm very happy to take any comments because my students have started to enter, as you might have noticed. I'll have to be with them in a minute, but any comments are very welcome. And I also look forward to reading the work by the other speakers today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Özlem, for joining us in these kind of circumstances and in just very shortly before your teaching commitments. So if anyone has any question to ask Özlem, if they have any pressing questions, please just drop them in the chat, or I can see there's a Q&A. So I think this question we can leave for the Q&A at the end. Alexandra, do you want to ask a question of Özlem?
I just wanted to say it was a great presentation. Thank you so much. I'm doing a project at the moment interviewing unions and how they have reacted to work time reduction after COVID. And it's confirming exactly what you say. Unions have seen this as a sort of natural experience, and people are hungry for this positive changes that this has done. So it's really being echoed amongst practitioners as well. I just really excited.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I see Joanna has dropped a question in the Q&A. So thanks all. Özlem, you mentioned that shorter working weeks are associated with a smaller gender pay gap. Is this because pay is going down across the board, or just for men?
Take these two. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, thanks, Alexandra. Great comment. And obviously, one has to also look at how pay conditions and working conditions evolve with that. Without trade unions on board, things don't work. But public sector, of course, with strong coordination with trade unions as well, can really make this natural experiment of the pandemic work in a better planned and managed context. The most important thing there is to avoid enforced flexibility that happened a lot in the health and care sector in France on women. When you don't plan well and try and educate and hire more workers in some industries, you just make people work more, and sometimes without overtime, where they accumulate work hours for lifetime in a time budget. But of course, this is no good for stress levels. But yeah, and trade unions are the most important component of that. Joanna's point is very important. The closure of the gap, on the one hand, is about women working more hours because the norm of the working week is different, and men are working shorter hours, which means there's more demand for more employment, and women meet that demand by increased supply. And I think also on the labor supply side, when women don't have to do the unpaid care work anymore as much as they used to do, because men pick up some unpaid care when they work shorter hours, that opens up the opportunity to work longer hours for women, but also to go for different positions in the same occupation or sector, and probably go over glass ceilings or approach the top of the distribution. So this would be the upward convergence story. Obviously, this is median wage in the sense that it's the total earnings. So if men are working shorter even with some wage compensation for the hourly wage rate, there might be a stagnation in their annual earnings, whereas women's annual earnings are converging to that slower increasing men's annual earnings, or more stagnant men's annual earnings. That's again a slight upward convergence. But in the cases we are looking at, you may find unhappy cases like a downward convergence as well. The UK, after the financial crisis, had a downward convergence in hourly wage rates as well as annual earnings, meaning men's earnings fell faster than women's earnings falling. So both are falling, but men's earnings are falling faster. That's not what we would aspire for. Hence the whole story about public sector leading with provision of universal basic services, increasing care economy size, employment and wage rights in that economy. And at the same time, obviously, strong unions being a partner in this process, making sure that we have an upward convergence in earnings and hourly wage rights. I'm afraid my students, while this is part of the curriculum in the next weeks, it wasn't the curriculum today, and they caught the tail end of the discussion rather than the beginning. If there is not another burning comment or question, I would have to go, but the discussion is being recorded, so if there are comments about what we did, please raise them when I'm in the classroom teaching, and I'm going to watch the session in peace with a working computer, listening all my three co-panelists again, without the stress of connection, but also the discussion. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Özlem. So I'm conscious of the time. So bye-bye. I'm conscious of the time. So what we're going to do now is straight into our last paper, which is by Marilyn Howard, and it's entitled Social Security, the Missing Link in Tackling Climate Change and Gender Inequality. So Marilyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I think one of the Women's Budget Group staff has got my slides, because I also had problems sharing in the tech run. So it wanted to share my emails. So I thought that wasn't a very good idea. So hopefully they will come up. But if not, maybe I'll just start anyway, because I know we're short of time. Just to say thank you very much to the Women's Budget Group for inviting me today. And the work I'm doing is also part of the Feminist Green New Deal work with the Women's Budget Group. So I'm doing some thinking around social security. So this is really a helpful and timely discussion for me. So I'm going to just run through very quickly what social security is, some climate change issues within the UK. I'm going to then talk about using Nancy Fraser's principles to assess ideas, to talk a little bit about where we want to get to, and some questions for debate. So just looking at, I'm not sure whether I can't see any slides, so I'll just carry on.
Yes, please, Marilyn. We're going to try to get the slides up.
Yeah, I don't have any fancy graphs, so you won't be missing anything if you don't actually. There we are. Lovely, thank you. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. The social security. So it's possible to break down those two words. So if we're talking about social, that's around the outcome of individual security in social or collective ways. And security concerns ends, not means, and tackling social and economic insecurity. So the objects of social security, and this is drawn from the work of Ruth Lister and Adrian Sinfield, is that it's not just about poverty relief, but it's about economic security. It's about shared protection and pooling of risks across the life cycle. And it's also about sharing costs, such as generated by children and disability, and social security can contribute to reducing inequalities. Next slide, please. So climate change and responses. We've talked already about how people on low incomes and women are particularly affected. And I think Marianne was talking about how people see the problem, so that it's not simply a scientific issue that can be fixed through technology, but it's also to do with inequality, so social change is needed. Also, it's not just a matter of listening to the experts, but actually it's including the participation of those who are normally excluded or who might be most affected by climate change. And we know, of course, that it's not always gendered. So just looking at issues from the UK, social security is often missing, or one's particular solution is assumed within green debate. So, for example, there's a bit of polarization between ideas for universal basic services, which imply a means-tested income floor, versus an unconditional universal basic income. But actually, there are aspects of both that are important, and the real question is, what's the best balance? Next slide, please. Looking at assessment using Nancy Fraser's principles, I think Nancy Fraser tries to bridge the gap between different kinds of ideas that Ugne was talking about. So, for example, if you break down her work into 7 principles, there's an anti-poverty principle, which is to prevent, not just relieve poverty; anti-exploitation, to prevent exploitation from a partner or employer; and importantly, having an income as of right; income equality both within and beyond the household, such as in gender pay gaps; and importantly, having leisure time equality. So it's not just having more time if you have to do twice the work. Equality of respect, anti-marginalisation, so women aren't relegated to the private sphere; and anti-androcentrism, so there isn't an assumption that male patterns are the norm, so women shouldn't have to be like men. If we could go to the next slide, please. So where do we want to get to? I guess the end goal is a gender equal and sustainable social security system. And in doing that, then clearly meeting needs is important, though I think we do need to bear in mind that the concept of needs is actually multiple and contested, and there's been a lot of academic and other debate about it. What I think has been a bit missing is looking at social security as a human right. And there are international obligations relating to social security itself and to discrimination against women. And also Fraser's principles 2 and 5 pick up the issue of rights. And I think in that context too, it would be an interesting debate to try and bring together ideas about nature as having rights, and human rights not necessarily being divorced from the rights of nature. So what I think we're looking at with social security is a sort of shock responsive system, which needs to consider probably 3 time periods, looking at what needs to happen now in order to build resilience, what needs to happen to support transitions to environmental sustainability, and longer term provision within planetary limits. So the final slide is just flagging up some questions for debate. So what would be a just transition, and what's the role of gender equal social security? So is it just support for individuals, or is it something for employers? What factors should be considered when looking at how to balance services and social security? And what's the role of other policy areas which interact with social security? So, for example, taxation, housing costs, and employment, as we've been discussing earlier on. So the final question then is, what changes do we need to make now? What do we need to put in place to support a transition? And what do we think about the longer term? So sorry, it's just a quick run through, but it's work in progress. So I'd be really interested to hear any people's questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, for an overview of some of the questions around what a social security system should look like or some principles for a social security system in the context of the green transition. So what we're going to do is, if anyone has any pressing questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll be able to maybe go through one or two before we have our break before the second panel. There was a general question that Ella put in the Q&A, which was about what kind of behaviors are considered environmental behaviors. So I don't know if this was related to a particular presentation, but if anyone has any comments to give to this, feel free to, Alexandra.
I think it might have been to my presentation, because I had environmental behavior as a variable in my model. For that, I'm using an index that is created by 11 different types of environmental behavior, which is anything from, like, do you turn up the heat, or do you put on a sweater, to do you take, how much do you fly? And then I combine these into an index. So it's a Likert scale based questions towards an index. And that's how it's not a perfect measurement. It's not perfectly weighted, but it's a sort of accepted approximation of environmental behaviors. So that's what I used for this one.
Thank you, Alexandra. So if there are no more questions at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to break now, so have a 15-minute break. But before, I'm just going to run through kind of the Remo platform and what it looks like in the format that we are just going to go into in a moment. So we're now going to move into a floor plan, which is a networking mode. So what you'll see in your screen in a moment is a series of tables, as you would in an in-person conference. And so you can, when you are in that mode, you can kind of hover with your mouse over the tables and see who is in there. And you can join the different tables to have chats with the people who are in those tables, just like you would in an in-person conference. And so in the lunch and afternoon sessions, we will use this networking space a bit more. Equally, if you prefer to use that break as a proper screen break, feel free to do so. But there will be this space available for anyone who wants to network with other participants. There will also be an opportunity during the lunch hours, so the last half hour of the lunch break, there will be a networking space where the presenters from both panels of this morning will be around in the tables, and so people can join them and ask them questions about their presentations if they wish. So there will be that opportunity as well for people to pose more questions if they wish. So we're now going to move on to that networking space. And we will be back in presenting mode for our second panel at 11:30. So thank you very much to our presenters of this first panel for really interesting presentations. And thank you also everyone for bearing with us during the technical glitches that we had. Thank you very much, and I look forward to see you at 11:30.